Welcome to Working Progress. This is the podcast where we dive into strategies for success and journey towards progress. Whether you're aiming for personal growth or professional transformation, or both, you've come to the right place. Today's topic is all about leadership and 3 ways to build trust as a leader. Leadership isn't just about strategy or decision making, it's about trust. And who better to explore this topic with than Loren Kutsko? Loren is a consultant who specializes in helping business owners and CEOs assemble and develop high-performing leadership teams who accelerate profitable growth so they see a strong return on their investment. With a background in informatics and leadership excellence as a global CIO and COO, he has spent decades building trust with teams across industries and continents. In this episode, we'll dive into 3 key ways leaders can build trust, strengthen relationships, and create a culture where people thrive. Whether you're leading a small team or a global organization, these insights will help you foster connection and credibility in a way that drives real results. So let's get started. First, welcome, Loren. We are so happy to have you here at the new building in TTI. This is actually the first podcast that we're filming in the new building. So thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to see the new space. Yeah, it's exciting.
Beautiful. So let's get into it. Why is trust so essential in leadership?
Yeah, it's a really good question. We've been using TTI tools in our practice probably for about 9 years or so. And I think I initially noticed this because the TTI tools help a lot, but there were some leaders who we would be using these with that would not quite be able to, get their team over the hump of performance. And so we started looking into, what is going on? Like, why isn't that happening? And there was this absence of trust on the team. So they might be willing to use the tools. They might be willing to kind of try to figure out what's going on. But they hadn't necessarily gotten all of the people who report to them to really have confidence that they're not going to be punished or humiliated by them or something. And so the trust was kind of a key ingredient that needed to take place in order for the team to really perform.
Okay. So this is a big one. How do you define trust as a leader?
Yeah, so I alluded to it in what I just said. It's somewhat intangible. I mean, teams have to have this sense that everybody else on the team, in particular the leader, is not has their back and is not going to. They're not going to experience repercussions or punishment or humiliation for raising concerns or asking questions or sharing risky ideas or even making mistakes. So there's got to be that belief that, the kind of intangible internal belief and sense of confidence that if I do something wrong, it's a we thing, not just a me thing. Everybody else on the team isn't going to be, waiting until they get out of the meeting to go have side meetings and say, yeah, that guy's probably got to go.
Yes, absolutely. So it's one of those things that I've heard as a leader, there are 3 key words. It's my fault. So as a leader, I'm really building that trust. It does come from the top down.
Yep.
So what are some of the common misconceptions that with trust in leadership? What are you seeing in your business in particular?
Yeah. I would say one misconception is that it takes a long time to build trust. Mm-hmm. And I would say that can be true. Like one aspect of trust is, you do want to take the time and put in the effort to build it, but it doesn't always take a long time to build it.
Okay.
So first impressions are really important, and you can very quickly build trust with people right when they join your team if you handle that first impression well.
Okay.
And so that's one misconception. It doesn't always take a long time. It can be done quickly.
Mm-hmm. So what would you typically say? How long does it typically take to build trust? You say that it starts right out the gate. Would you say it's a couple days? What do you typically see?
Yeah, that's tricky. I'd say it depends.
Okay.
There's not like a hard and fast rule on how long it takes to develop trust. And different people do it differently. So some people are, kind of fast to trust, but then when you lose trust with them, it takes a long time to rebuild it. Other people are a little bit more, it takes a long time to get their trust. So it depends on the particular people involved, I would say.
Okay. So that kind of leads me into my next question then. What are 3 key behaviors or habits that help leaders build trust?
So I remember this through be curious, be vulnerable,
Yes.
and be consistent.
Okay.
But I'm also a big advocate that you need to have those be behaviors, not things that you be.
Yes.
So I remember them that way. But really the behaviors for curiosity are asking questions
Okay.
and genuinely listening to the answers. And these are all very basic things, right? So, sometimes I even feel like I share these and, sort of looking for a flash of lightning,
Yes.
new innovative idea. But one of the challenges I think with trust and with a lot of teams is they don't have trust because they skip the basics. They almost feel like they're too basic, that they assume that they're going to happen. And so they're not even really focused on them. But being curious by asking questions and really genuinely caring about the answers and listening for those is a key behavior to build trust.
Okay.
With being vulnerable, people connect when they see similarity and people know about their own weaknesses.
Yes.
And so when they have their supervisor or their manager share their weaknesses with them, particularly when they volunteer and go first with sharing those, that really builds a lot of rapport and trust and connection between two people. So be curious, be vulnerable, and then be consistent. Honestly, one of the most common and most frustrating things that we see when we start working with a new team is a leader of the team not showing up or showing up late for meetings. And it's, again, this very basic thing, but you can see the entire team, sitting around on the Zoom call waiting for it to start, or being in the conference room waiting for, and everybody's kind of going, did I get it wrong? Was I supposed to be here? Like, is this happening? Is this meeting important? And these seeds of mistrust just start to kind of fester and grow.
Yep.
And it's just a very basic thing to not, in some ways, not take advantage of that leadership role.
Okay.
And believe that it's okay for you to operate differently than you would expect from the people on your team. And so you have to be consistent, show up on time, respect the other people that are on the team with you.
So really lead by example and,
For sure.
and
Yep.
not have that culture of do as I say, not as I do.
Absolutely. Yep.
That is from somebody who has gone into a meeting and you're going, oh my gosh, where did I, exactly what you were saying. Did I get this wrong? What's going on? Where is this person? It really does create that sense of, did I mess up?
Right.
And you don't want that.
Absolutely. And on the one hand, you've got the leader oftentimes feeling frustrated that their team is not performing to the level that they expect them to or they need them to.
Yeah.
But then on the other hand, you're creating this opportunity for your people to experience doubt.
Yes.
And that begins to just create the opportunity for them not investing every moment efficiently to achieve that performance.
Yes.
So now you've got them twiddling their thumbs in a meeting, waiting, wondering what's going on. Then they start wondering, what are the other things that you're telling me that I can't count on? And so you just really, as the leader, you use the words, it's my fault. I might soften it a little bit and just say
Please.
it's my responsibility as the leader to
Yes.
do the things all the time that create the environment where trust can be built.
Okay. So you talked about communication. How does that really play a role in fostering trust then?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, communication's everything, right? So we know that a huge percentage of communication is nonverbal.
Yes.
We talked about the first impressions, like the way that the person in authority is communicating with the people on their team matters. It matters to how the trust is being built. One of the things I do love about the Talent Insights assessment from TTI is the communication do's and don'ts. And I think the big picture takeaway there is you have to communicate to the people on your team the way that they need to be communicated with.
Yes.
Not necessarily the way that you like to be communicated with, not the way that your favorite person on the team likes to be communicated with. Each person has their own communication preferences. And trust is built in a lot of ways when people are communicated with the way that they want to be communicated.
Mm-hmm.
That's one reason that mirroring works, right? So, if you don't have the results of someone's assessment and you're just trying to evaluate, right? Like you've got your legs crossed, I can cross my legs. I can, do the same behaviors that you're doing
Yes.
and the same words that you're saying
Yep.
so that you trust me.
Yes.
Right? So communication matters a lot.
It really does kind of ease. It's like you were saying, it's the verbal communication, but it's also the nonverbal communication.
Right.
So like you said, crossing your feet or even just looking somebody in the eye, even a simple handshake probably is
absolutely. Something
that I know that sometimes when a man just gives me, a little handshake, I'm like, give me a real handshake. It's that, but it's immediate trust where I go, maybe you don't trust me because you didn't give me a firm handshake like you would somebody else.
Yeah. So how much does communication matters? I mean, 100%, 1,000%, right?
Yes.
Like almost all of the behaviors that we're talking about in building trust are communication related.
And it can be talking or, like you said, nonverbal as well.
Yep.
It is really just those first impressions. So what is one of the biggest mistakes that leaders can make that break trust then?
Yeah. I mean, we talked about inconsistency, kind of not treating others the way that you would want them to be treated. I think that really is it. Coming in with, ready answers and telling people all the time instead of checking in before communicating and asking. We talk about this with feedback a lot. Like you always want to ask permission to give feedback because you just never know if someone's ready to receive something so important. And so the first step in effective feedback is to say, can I give you some feedback? Instead of just, walking by the office and saying, hey, that was a great presentation, or that was a terrible presentation, right? Like whatever the feedback is, it's a really good idea to stop and make sure you've got someone's undivided attention.
Okay. So if trust is broken then, how do you coach your leaders to gain that trust back?
Yeah. So I've honestly been really surprised how common it is for people to flinch towards avoidance.
Okay.
So one of the biggest mistakes or biggest challenges is as soon as there's a perception that there's a rift in the relationship, the leader may start avoiding the person that has the rift there. That's exactly the opposite of the thing that you want to do. It's because it's hard, right? Because you're trying to build trust to make some of these conversations easier, but then you start to notice that the trust is broken or depleting. And so, one thing we talk about is having consistent times when these meetings take place. Okay. So if you're in the habit of doing weekly one-on-ones at the same time in the same place with the same agenda, that helps a lot because then you can there's a common point of connection and checking in, and time isn't going very long in between these meetings.
Okay.
So if that exists, that's ideal because you can check in every week and you can say, you can kind of measure the trust, check in. So what you want to do is I would say hit it head on, but again, kind of referencing our last conversation or your last question about communication do's and don'ts, you do want to be aware of who you're talking to. So if you're direct and you have another direct person, then you can be direct about it. If you know that you're direct and the other person that the trust is broken with is more indirect, then you may want to take a different approach, right?
Okay.
Being direct on top of the broken trust could make it worse.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were talking about the communication do's and don'ts page. Do you do anything when you are doing any type of coaching, if it's one-on-one coaching or a manager with an employee? Do you have them share those do's and don'ts of communication up front?
For sure. So I mean, some of these questions are kind of more general. If we're working with two specific people and there is conflict or broken trust, absolutely. We'll do a triad coaching. One of us or our coaches will come in and work with the two people on the team that are having challenges and, begin to unearth what's going on. And the assessments can become very helpful because we can see and show the people that are experiencing this breakdown of trust, the differences between themselves and the person that they're with so that they can specifically get some tips on what to do differently.
And do you tend to see that people focus more on the communication do's or the communication don'ts?
Yeah, I don't know if one of them is more common. That's a good question. I'd say, different people respond more to the negative, and some people respond more to the positive.
Yes.
The main thing is that you're asking the person that you're experiencing the depletion of trust with for their perspective. So that's, if you go in asking, and then you use these tools to help get them talking, reviewing the communication do's and don'ts for myself is in and of itself a trust building activity. Yes. Somebody's coming in and saying, tell me about you and what your preferences are. And if you actually create the space to do that, and this is why it can be helpful to do this with a coach. We encourage leaders to do this all the time without us, as a way for them to, they've got these resources, use them. But we do find that it can be difficult for them to carve out the space on their own. That's why the one-on-ones can be really helpful to do that.
So that's really, when we are talking about difficult conversations, maintaining that trust through that conversation. So you're saying maybe just a weekly one-on-one, making it more consistent, but also being able to recognize somebody's behavioral style. So to your example, that a direct person can go straight at a direct person and say, okay, somebody who's not as direct, how do you maintain that trust during those difficult conversations?
Yeah. So, you're illustrating, if you've got a direct person and an indirect person, you're going to review their communication preferences and communicate with them the way that they want to be communicated with. So that's the first thing.
Yeah.
Once you're in the conversation, I think it is possible for trust to be broken beyond repair.
Okay.
So that's one of the reasons that you want to try to catch these things early.
Okay.
Is because when things go for weeks, months, quarters, even years, we've been brought into teams to evaluate, what to do next, because there's so much tension in the team that everybody's talking about each other behind their backs, right? And so they're asking us, can this be repaired? And sometimes, we'll come back with a report to the senior leader and say, we think it's going to be really difficult for this particular person and that particular person to continue working together. And so there are opportunities for us to, reorganize the team, reorganize the organization, put them in different roles. So that's fairly common.
Okay.
But you can catch it early. And I think good leaders who build trust do this. They don't let it get so bad.
Okay.
And so if you can get into that conversation with one another, then you can ensure that you both have a shared goal and then come up with a shared plan for rebuilding the trust. If you're able to get two people that have experienced broken trust with each other to even have that conversation, you're well on your way.
Yes.
Right? If you can't, then I think it indicates that, things may be worse than you thought.
And you might need to really reevaluate, like you said, maybe a different role or something like that.
Yeah, but if it gets there, one of the hardest parts about this is it takes such humility from the leader.
Okay.
Because they're the ones that are going to have to own the fact that the trust was broken to some degree, even if it's not fully theirs to own, because like you said, I'm the leader. I have more authority. I have more power in the organization.
Yes.
I probably have more pay. There's a lot of reasons where the reason I have all of these privileges is because I need to take responsibility in situations like this to be the one to kind of, eat crow and say, maybe this was my fault or some parts of this were my fault. And so that repair is an important process.
Okay. So humility is key when being a leader. And then also just, it's my responsibility. So it will soften the it's my fault a little bit. So it's my responsibility. Okay. What is one piece of advice that you would give to leaders looking to strengthen trust within their teams?
Time. I think, so I'm a quality time person. So I think I'm even, short of sharing what I would prefer, but I see a lot of leaders being afraid to spend time with people. Either they're worried about, them not getting the work done that they need to get done. They're worried about them distracting their team members from the work that they need to get done. But there's kind of this go slow to go fast idea that, works in sales, but it also works in a lot of other human relationships. And if you can take the time to invest early, you'll reap what you sow later. And so take the time to put into the relationships before you're in any kind of crisis, before things go wrong. Spend the time it takes to ask those questions, be vulnerable, and be consistent.
Okay.
Leads to a lot of trust.
So time. It's all about time.
Well, that's, yeah. If you ask for one thing, I'd say
I love it.
Be willing to invest the time.
Well, and like you say, go slow to go fast, because once you do spend that time and build that relationship, then you know that you can trust that person and that person can trust you.
Yeah.
So,
and I don't want to miss that either. Right? We didn't talk too much about that at the beginning, but I think part of the point of doing this is for speed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you need the team to operate at speed. You need to compete against your competitors. You need to have high performance. Like, those are all the underlying goals, right? We're talking about, I'm spending a lot of money on payroll, and I see my gross margin in my company, decreasing, not increasing, right? I've got to solve these problems as the business owner or the CEO, or those are my responsibilities,
yes.
right? I need this team to perform. So sometimes I worry these conversations get a little bit too touchy-feely.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about, how do I build trust? How do I make sure everybody's comfortable? But the point of this is performance. Like, that's why we're a work team together, is to exceed the goals that we've set for ourselves and that have been set for us in our organizations.
Okay. I like that. Are there any resources, so books, podcasts, TED Talks, that you would recommend for leaders when they are trying to improve trust?
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff out there on trust.
Mm-hmm.
So, Covey's got a great, this has been around for decades, book on trust called The Speed of Trust.
Okay.
I'm a big fan of Amy Edmondson. She's put some really good stuff out and done some research on psychological safety, which I think is very similar in a lot of ways to trust. So her work, The Fearless Organization, I think is the title of her book. She does have a couple TED Talks. So if you Google Amy Edmondson, you'll get some good resources. I'm sure she's been interviewed on many podcasts.
One last question. How can our listeners connect with you or learn more about your work?
Sure. So, the easiest way to reach out to us is the contact form on our website, which is Kutsko Consulting, Kutsko Consulting.com. And love to help out in any way we can with what's going on with your teams.
Beautiful. Well, that's a wrap on today's conversation on building trust as a leader. Remember, trust isn't built overnight. It's the result of consistent actions, open communication, and commitment to transparency. Start small, stay intentional, and watch how trust transforms your leadership and your team. Loren, thank you so much for being here. It was an absolute pleasure having you here and on our first podcast in the new building. As always, thank you to our listeners for tuning into Working Progress. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing or sharing it with a colleague or fellow leader, or just leave us a review. Until next time, keep leading with trust, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep making progress. Take care.